Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm Mark Buzz, and I'm so glad to be here today with Anna Buggs, our resident expert in, well, all things creepy crawly. We're going to be diving deep into something today that especially applies to those of you renting in California. So if you are renting in California, this one's really for you. We're talking about tenant rights when it comes to cockroach infestations.
Right. It can be really overwhelming to try to sift through the legal stuff and really understand how to protect yourself as a renter.
Yeah, and if you like what you hear today, hit that like button, subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on future deep dives. And of course, huge thanks to Simple Pest Management for lending their expertise to this topic. Be sure to give them a follow on social media for even more great advice. Okay, so let's jump into it. We got this article here from Simple Pest Management, and it's called Know Your Tenant Rights in California. Cockroaches. Most renters, I think are familiar with the idea that landlords have to provide a habitable living space. But what does that actually mean when it comes to cockroaches?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, California Civil Code 1941.1 actually lays out these standards for habitability. And freedom from infestations is definitely one of those standards. And it's important to point out that this isn't just about a landlord reacting once there's a problem. It's actually their legal duty to be proactive in preventing infestations in the first place.
So it's not like you can just wait till there are roaches everywhere and then call the exterminator. You actually have to take steps to keep them from coming in the first place.
Right. Exactly. So things like regular inspections, sealing up any cracks or holes that could be entry points, and just general maintenance of the property, making sure that there isn't anything attracting pests to begin with.
So for example, if there's a leaky pipe that's, dripping water and attracting roaches, the landlord can't just ignore that and wait for you to complain. They actually have to fix it before it turns into a bigger problem. Got it. So it's really about landlords taking responsibility for that pest-free environment from the start. But let's say those preventative measures fail, and you wake up one morning and you've got some uninvited guests in your kitchen. What are your rights as a renter at that point?
Well, first and foremost, document everything. Take pictures, take videos, anything you can to show the extent of the infestation. And then formally notify your landlord in writing.
Okay, so it's not enough to just, send them a quick text. You have to actually put it in writing.
Yeah, it's really about creating a paper trail.
Mhm.
That documentation is going to be crucial if you need to take further action.
Right, makes sense. So you've sent that notice, and hopefully your landlord is responsive and takes care of the problem. But what if they just ignore it? What are your options then?
Well, believe it or not, California law actually gives renters some pretty powerful tools in these situations. One option is rent deduction.
Okay.
After you've provided the proper notice and documentation, you can actually legally withhold a portion of your rent to compensate for those uninhabitable conditions.
Interesting. So you're not just skipping rent entirely. It's more like strategically withholding a portion that reflects the impact of that infestation.
Exactly. But it's not a free pass. There are specific procedures that you need to follow to make sure you're doing it legally.
Right.
I would always recommend researching those specific requirements for rent deduction in California, or maybe even consulting with a tenant rights organization.
Yeah. Doing your homework is essential. You don't want to accidentally violate your lease agreement. But let's say rent deduction still doesn't get your landlord's attention. What's the next level of escalation?
If they're still not responding, you might consider taking legal action. This could involve filing a lawsuit against your landlord for failing to provide a habitable living space. It's definitely a more drastic step, but sometimes it's necessary.
So it can really get to that level if the landlord is just completely neglecting their responsibilities.
Absolutely. And in extreme cases, if the infestation is really severe and it just hasn't been resolved, you might even have grounds to legally break your lease without penalty.
Wow. It sounds like California renters really do have a strong legal framework to protect them, but I imagine going through all of that is incredibly stressful.
It can be. That's why it's so important to understand your rights and your options up front. It's much better to be prepared and know what steps you can take.
I totally agree. Knowledge is power, right? And hopefully, just by being informed, renters can avoid these situations altogether.
Absolutely. Landlords knowing that their tenants are informed are a lot more likely to be proactive.
Right. So it's a win-win for both sides when renters know their rights. It creates a more balanced and respectful dynamic.
Exactly.
Well, let's be honest. Even with the strongest legal protections, nobody wants to deal with a cockroach infestation. So let's talk about some proactive steps renters can take to prevent these issues from happening in the first place.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So let's talk about some practical things renters can do to keep their homes roach-free.
All right, so Give us the inside scoop. What can we do to keep those roaches from wanting to move in?
Well, you got to think like a cockroach. What are they looking for? Food and water. So number one, keep your kitchen clean, like really clean.
Okay, so we're talking no dirty dishes in the sink, no crumbs on the counters.
Exactly. Wipe down those surfaces regularly, sweep and mop often, and take out the trash every day. Don't give those roaches any reason to think your kitchen is a buffet.
Okay, so deny them the food source. What about water? I know roaches are attracted to moisture.
You're right, they need water to survive, so any leaky faucets or pipes, get those fixed right away. And don't leave standing water in sinks or tubs. Make sure your bathroom is well ventilated so you don't have that moisture buildup. And wipe up any spills as soon as they happen.
Got it. Cleanliness is key. But are there any other sort of proactive measures renters can take? What about those over-the-counter bug sprays and traps? Are those worth trying?
Yeah, they can definitely be helpful, especially for targeting specific areas or if you just see a few roaches here and there. But if you're dealing with a full-blown infestation, it's best to call in the professionals.
Okay, so don't try to tackle a whole army of cockroaches by yourself.
Exactly. Pest control companies, they have the expertise, they have the tools to really handle those situations effectively and safely.
Right, so if you've got more than just a couple of roaches you're seeing, it's time to call in reinforcements.
Exactly.
Now, what if you're a renter who's a little bit concerned about using harsh chemicals in your home? Are there any kind of eco-friendly pest control options out there?
Absolutely. There's been a real movement towards eco-conscious pest control, and a lot of companies now specialize in using natural, non-toxic solutions.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so those treatments are safer for humans, pets, and the environment, but they can still be really effective at getting rid of roaches.
So renters who are concerned about the environmental impact, they have options. What kind of things do these eco-friendly companies use?
Well, they might use things like essential oils, or diatomaceous earth, or boric acid. Those are all effective at repelling or killing roaches, but they don't leave behind those harmful residues.
So it's worth doing a little bit of research, finding a company that aligns with your values.
Definitely. Don't be afraid to ask questions about their methods and what kind of options they have.
Okay, good to know. So we've talked about preventative measures. We've talked about eco-friendly solutions. But let's circle back to the legal stuff for a moment.
Yeah.
You mentioned rent deduction earlier as one option for dealing with unresponsive landlords. Can you break down exactly how that works in California?
Sure. So rent deduction or rent withholding, it's a legal tool that allows tenants to withhold a portion of their rent if the landlord isn't providing habitable living conditions. And as we talked about, cockroach infestations definitely fall under that category.
So it's a way of kind of holding your landlord accountable and making sure they take action.
Exactly.
But I imagine there are rules and procedures involved.
Right. You can't just decide not to pay rent. There are legal steps you need to take. So first, you need to notify your landlord in writing about the infestation and give them a reasonable opportunity to fix it. This is where that documentation we talked about earlier is really important.
Right, so those pictures, those videos, those emails are going to be really helpful.
Exactly. Once you've provided written notice and given them a reasonable amount of time to address the issue, then you can start deducting a portion of your rent.
Okay, so how do you determine how much rent to withhold?
Well, the amount should be reasonable and reflect the decrease in habitability. It's not an exact science. It can depend on things like the severity of the infestation and size of your unit.
So if you're living in a tiny studio apartment with a minor infestation, you wouldn't withhold the same amount as someone with a huge cockroach problem in a 4-bedroom house.
Right. It needs to be proportionate.
Okay.
I'd always recommend talking to a legal professional or a tenant rights organization to figure out what's reasonable in your specific situation.
So having that legal expert in your corner can be a smart move.
Absolutely. And one thing to remember is even when you're deducting rent, you should still keep paying that non-deducted portion on time. You don't want to give your landlord any reason to try to evict you.
Makes sense. So you've sent the notice, you've documented everything, you've started deducting a portion of your rent, but your landlord's still not budging. What's the next step?
Well, at that point, you might consider filing a lawsuit against your landlord for breach of the warranty of habitability. Basically, you're taking them to court for not providing a safe and livable environment. This is where having a lawyer on your side is really important.
Okay, so this is where things get serious.
It is, but it's good to know that option is there.
Right.
And in really extreme cases, where the infestation is severe and the landlord just won't do anything about it, you might even be able to pursue something called constructive eviction.
Constructive eviction. That sounds pretty intense.
It is. It basically means that the landlord has created conditions that make the rental unit uninhabitable. So you're allowed to legally break your lease and move out without penalty.
So it's like the landlord is forcing you out through their own neglect.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's a pretty drastic measure, but it is a tool that tenants have in these really difficult situations.
Right. It's important to remember, though, that constructive eviction is a complex legal process. You have to be able to prove that the landlord's actions, or in this case, inaction, have made it impossible for you to live in the unit. And you have to have given them proper notice and an opportunity to fix the problem.
So it's not just a matter of being annoyed by a few cockroaches. There has to be a serious breach of the warranty of habitability.
Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
again, having that legal professional to guide you through the process is really important.
Absolutely.
It's empowering to know that these options exist.
It is. And it really speaks to the strength of tenant rights in California. Everyone deserves a safe and habitable place to live.
Well said.
Ah.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive into California tenant rights and cockroach infestations.
It has.
We've covered everything from those preventative tips to that, really drastic measure of constructive eviction.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
And I think it really highlights how important it is for renters to know their rights.
I agree. Knowledge is power.
It is. But before we wrap up, I have one last question for you.
Okay, I'm listening.
We've talked a lot about the legal side of things, and California clearly has strong protections in place for renters. But wouldn't it be great if we could avoid these situations altogether?
Absolutely. Ideally, both landlords and tenants would be proactive, communicative, and respectful of each other's rights and responsibilities.
I love that, shifting the mindset from confrontation to collaboration.
Exactly.
So what are some ways that landlords and tenants can work together to create a more positive living environment?
Well, landlords can be proactive about maintaining their properties and addressing any potential pest issues early on. They can also educate their tenants about those preventative measures we talked about and provide clear guidelines on how to report any concerns.
So it's about setting clear expectations from the beginning.
Right. And tenants can do their part by keeping their units clean, reporting any problems right away, and just being respectful of the property.
It's recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a safe and healthy place to live. And hopefully, by working together, we can make those cockroach infestations a thing of the past.
Yeah, it really is about a change in perspective.
And, hopefully by having these conversations and shedding light on these issues, we can contribute to creating that more collaborative environment.
I agree. Open communication, mutual respect, it's essential.
Well, Anna, this has been a really insightful deep dive into the world of California tenant rights and cockroach infestations. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy unpacking these topics and helping renters understand their rights.
And for our listeners out there, remember, knowledge is power. The more you know about your rights and responsibilities, the better prepared you'll be to handle any situation that comes up.
Exactly. And if you ever find yourself dealing with a cockroach infestation, don't hesitate to reach out to a pest control professional. They can help you figure out the best way to address the problem and get your peace of mind back.
Great advice. And of course, a huge thank you to Simple Pest Management for sponsoring this episode. Be sure to check out their website and give them a follow on social media for more tips and advice.
They're a great resource.
Oh, folks, that's our deep dive for today. We hope you found it informative and helpful. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And remember, stay curious, stay informed.
Stay pest-free.
This is Mark Buzz, signing off.